Hi, I've been at Valve going on 9 years now, primarily focusing my time on getting music into the games and working, exploring really all the various ways that we can use music at Valve. Audio as well. My background, I'm old enough that I was a core bohemian artist before digital anything really existed. So I have this really hard art background, but then also have used the PC over the years as it emerged as a tool, and then obviously as a platform, writing games and whatnot throughout those years. So I wouldn't say I've straddled the line between the arts and digital, but at Valve I've really kind of occupied this space of doing both at the same time. This talk, normally my talks are kind of to a pretty niche group of people, composers, audio technician people, maybe students who are looking to get into the thing. I'm not really sure where you guys are coming at it from, so I'm going to kind of hit a broad range of topics pretty lightly, and I'll have to go fairly quickly because I cover a lot of them. But the main focus is going to be sort of some of the things we've done over the years, how we've used music, what we've learned from it, and how we've kind of then progressed from what we've learned, and then kind of on each topic visit like what we're looking forward to doing, and hopefully maximizing the art and craft of music as an element, not just in our games, but in our media in general, and Steam, as a platform. Doing a talk about music makes me think of that kind of famous quote, talking about music is like dancing about architecture, which I hope is not actually true because I'm about to spend, the next 45 minutes doing that. But I do understand the sentiment of that, which is basically you can't talk music. Music is a thing unto itself, and the only way to really experience the effect of music and the effectiveness of music is to do it, right? And so one of the threads that I think I'll keep hitting on here is also a core philosophy of how we work at Valve, which is sort of a free approach, the minimizing of barriers, right? Like trying to keep the iterative loop as tight as possible, and exploration, right? Music and games, I think, has a great history already, which has definitely established an amazing vocabulary, an amazing set of tools and ideas we can use, but I don't think we're anywhere near tapped out. I think there's just a ton that we can do going forward. So I'll talk about that, the things that we're excited about. And just like every talk here, I think one of the big things we're looking forward to is what you guys would like to see us and help you with, or anything that we can do to facilitate your use of music as a valuable medium. Any Valve product has to start in this way, as far as I'm concerned. I doubt this talk will live up to the expectations that I don't know about you, but what that gives me. The reason I use it is because usually when people talk about music, they consider it as it adds the emotional element to a movie, or the emotional, and that is true. I think that's an entirely valid point for the most part. But in this case, and something that one of the things that we really have the advantage of in games is of symbolic meaning, right? Like that piece of music to me means I'm about to do something amazing, like go on some experience that's really creative or unique, a Valve experience. And that isn't because of the emotion that music gave me, it's because of my experience with what follows that. It's kind of a Pavlovian effect. And I think as an artist in the craft, we composers think in not just in terms of how to create emotional experiences, but also how to communicate, especially in games. Again, this next part, I don't know if you guys know anything about how music is made for games or film, so I'm going to do a quick summary of sort of how we work, composers in the industry, and it's pretty standard. I'll touch real quick on how we work at Valve. You know, if you know anything about Valve, we're hierarchy free, which really means we're free to explore and execute, which is great for, again, for music, because you got to kind of try it to know if it's going to work and what kind of effect it's having. But because of that, artists are very integrated in the team. We don't do much like over-the-wall kind of work with music. It tends to be like you're right in there, plugging it in, trying it out. If it doesn't work, you change it, or if the team doesn't like it, you talk to them and figure out why. And we really focus on goals and constraints, because again, music's a tough thing to talk about. If you don't know the language around it, it's tough to say, like, oh, I really didn't like that part you know, in that map where that trumpet played. Like, that is not really useful feedback usually for a composer, unless it's coming maybe from another composer. But if you were to say, you know, the goal of this map is X, and the music doesn't seem to be getting there. And then constraints are another thing that we're always thinking about, like, what's our time frame? What are our you know, the, I don't know, memory budgets, that kind of stuff. All right, so just real quick, how music is made for any game, or we're going to start with some linear content. It's the same as most audio artists and other studios. Music is still, unless you're a purely electronic artist, still made in largely the same way. Personally, I tend to like to think my ideas through as much as I possibly can. I don't sit and work with a pencil and paper, although I do know people who do that. I'll tend to think it through as much as possible. Then I might sit down at a piano, kind of figure out my parts, but then really most of the time is spent at the computer, kind of getting a mock-up or you know, doing the actual work itself if it's electronic music. Like I say, I know people who work with pen and paper. I know people who work purely like straight into the computer. Usually the first thing we'll do is a mock-up, which is like a pencil sketch. And just like a pencil sketch with an artist, let's say a comic book, where, you know, if you've ever looked at a pencil drawing that becomes a comic book, there's a pretty big distance between those two. We kind of do the same thing, and we know where that end goal is, but one of the disadvantages is the people that we're working with often don't understand the jump that's going to be made, right? This example I'm about to play is one of the very first things I did at Valve. It was for I think the very first TF2 trailer. We had 2 days. It was one of those like, hey, Mike, could you do a piece of music for us? Yeah, when's it need to be done? In 2 days. And so I very purposely made these mock-ups very rough, right? I did probably 5 or 6 of them, just so that we had a lot of different things to choose from. And so, I wanted to kind of get as many options on the table as I could as quickly as possible. But there's another reason, and after you hear it, I'll kind of explain that a little bit. All right, these pictures, by the way, are our audio suites at Valve. It's when you're working on music or audio in general, it's pretty important to have a nice space to work in. And in the last couple of years, we've invested in these. Anyway, so the super rough nature of that, like that kind of synth line, the synth organ part, I chose to do it that way so I could communicate the feeling of the piece to people who might not understand that my crappy sample of a trumpet is crappy, right? Like, I didn't want the feedback to be like, yeah, I didn't understand that. What was that thing? It's like, well, that's actually a trumpet. Like, I didn't want that to be the conversation. And it worked. At that time, again, it was really early. But later on, as you've worked with a musician for long, or if you're a musician and you've worked with people, hopefully you can, create this sense of trust where they understand, like, well, as long as the music felt right, he'll probably turn it into something that sounds actually good. So I'll play the actual trailer that came from it, and then we'll talk about a little bit how I got from there to there. All right, so from that mock-up to this piece, basically, again, I had about a day at that point. What you typically do is you go in the studio, you record, in this case, a garage rock rhythm section. We got a brass section, and get all the tracks in place. It depends on what type of thing you're working on that determines what sort of tracking that you're going to do. And this is a picture of Tim Larkin with a full orchestra, probably for a piece of Dota music maybe, or Counter-Strike, I'm not sure which. This is a musical saw player that we got for Left 4 Dead 2. Depending on the work that you're doing, it could be anything from, again, a full orchestra to Left 4 Dead 1. We used kind of purposely a mid-sized kind of Hollywood in the 70s B-level orchestra sound, because we were kind of going for this cheap horror score vibe a little bit. Again, small eclectic stuff for Left 4 Dead 2. Portal 2 was all entirely electronic. And even the kind of symphonic stuff was purposely done with samples for two reasons. And this is kind of an important thing when you're considering this kind of thing, which is we had put so much music in the game at the very end, at the end of the cycle of iteration and whatnot, implementation, to suddenly have to disappear from the development process and go into the studio for several weeks or whatever to record and mix and finalize the music, and then bring it back into the game and have it be different than it was 2 weeks before you're going to ship, is a relatively dangerous choice to make. And it's not necessarily a bad one, but it's definitely one that we've learned to kind of keep in mind as we do this. Let's see, mixing is just taking all those pieces, bringing them down to, mixing them down to 2 tracks or 6 tracks, whatever it is, how it's going to be listened to or put into the game or the piece of linear material. This is our fancy mixing room at Valve. Again, we've invested quite a bit of money in our studio spaces, and I'll kind of go into a little bit how we've come to, realize that the music in our games, in our media, is actually really valuable and worth the investment in that way. So going forward, just from this kind of creation standpoint, one of the things that, as is with everything, we're hoping that our audience will make more music, right? So we've made a bunch of audio software tools available in Steam, and they're actually selling really well, which is great, because that means those partners are now recognizing that there's money in that market, and they're investing energy into making their software tools potentially more integrated with Steam. And we've got plugins, and the list of things that are going to become available in Steam is growing. All right, so anyway, composers, it's very much like design. design work. And one of the first ways that we expose that work is through trailers. That Team Fortress 2 trailer is a good example. A lot of times this is the first exposure to a game that the audience is going to have. And it's a really good time, especially for a musician, but as a style guide altogether to get feedback from the audience. In that case, we got great feedback. People loved it. Portal 2 was the same thing. In fact, it drove us to really focus more heavily on music in the game. Left 4 Dead 2, when we first dropped a trailer, it's a funny anecdote. I don't know if funny is the word I'd use, but the Left 4 Dead 1 community kind of freaked out, at least a portion of it, and they had all kinds of complaints about this trailer that they had seen from E3, and one of them was that the music. And looking at it and reading their comments, we were able to kind of discern we were going with this old-timey southern vibe of music because the whole thing was set in the South, and I've always wanted to do sort of a old-timey gothic, kind of dark roots music. But we had kind of, the fiddle music was associated with the zombies, and it was a little more on the major side. And I think in that trailer, it kind of came across cartoony. And the audience was not happy about that at all. They let us know. And it gave us a nice amount of lead time to then kind of adjust what it is we're doing and go forward. And now it's still kind of an odd score, but it's definitely much darker than it was at that time. Here's a Dota 2 trailer. One of the goals of these two is, again, to set the style, but also reflect the gameplay. Like that Team Fortress 2 trailer, the music is slightly out of tune, right? Kind of like the gameplay in Team Fortress. And not that the game's out of tune. It's definitely very well balanced. But the aspect of the classes and you come up with a big plan and then it all kind of falls apart and then you just wing it. And anyway, this trailer, I think, represents Dota 2 pretty well from a musical standpoint.
Often I am asked, what does a hero truly need? Much depends upon the hero. Would you be swift? Then for you, I have speed beyond measure. Then I can grant you the might to overpower any foe. Would you be wise? Then come closer and I will unlock your inner cunning. What does a hero truly need? That is for you to decide.
Anyway, I don't think we're particularly unique in that regard, that we use music, with our trailers as marketing. We do really focus on kind of getting a good Bible right out the gate and really looking at the feedback that we get from it. We recognize that trailers are a really big part of games, and so we have that as part of the Steam store page. We made it pretty easy to add media to your games, and our games probably first was the interest. The one thing, though, that then we started to learn with the Portal as a good example was the song Still Alive by Jonathan Colton took off in a way that we just didn't foresee at all. It caught us completely off guard. You can see here, we released it later on, actually on a CD, but up until then, and even now, 20 million views on YouTube of a fan recorded section at the end of the game is kind of how a lot of people, I think, are experiencing this song still today. And, like I said, it kind of took off in a way that we didn't foresee. And I think it really was super valuable to the game and had a life of its own. It was, had an almost meme quality to it. Team Fortress 2, in its own way, it's one of those classic long tail games, and it was sort of one of the experiments we were running when we launched Team Fortress 2. We had seen this with Counter-Strike previously, and we were wondering, can we do the same basic idea of not launch a game and have it sell a bunch and then tail out, instead launch it and have it grow in sales over time. And I'm sure somebody today or tomorrow is probably talking about those same ideas in another talk and focusing on it. But the ways that we've done that over time, and we've experimented with all kinds of different ways to provide more entertainment value to Team Fortress over time is, updates are huge. We just, keep pumping out updates to the game, new game modes, that kind of stuff, the obvious kind of big ticket items. But we're doing a lot of other smaller ticket items like comics to support the lore and the backstory to the game, and movies. And in the process, we've done a whole series of animated shorts introducing the different classes in the game. And a big part of those shorts has been music. When we first released the game, we had 3 pieces of music from 2 trailers we'd done, and we just dropped them in the menu system. And people really responded positively to that. And our audience is savvy enough to crack the game open, pull the MP3s out, and then share them amongst each other, right? And so then when we did a couple more shorts, we mixed the music out as a separate item and dropped them in the menu system. And if you've ever worked on multiplayers, you'll know that the immediate reaction was like, what the hell's going on? You changed it. And then, somebody would chime back in and say, well, they didn't take anything away. They just, and eventually people understood. And now if we do a short and we don't drop the music in the menu system, which they immediately will crack open and pull the MP3s out, I just get instant emails like, where is that? How do I get a copy of that, right? And so we've kind of short-circuited the music distribution concept by just putting the music in the game. And we've done that with a few different systems. Meet the Medic is a good example of just from a kind of cross-media marketing thing. It just recently went over 22 million views. And somebody took the MP3 from the game, posted it to YouTube, and just on its own, it's over 1 million. Left 4 Dead 2, there's a level where the finale happens on a stage, and so we decided to make a fictitious band, Midnight Riders, and we used a blog to post. We don't actually post the music on the blog. We just post comments, or not comments, but blog posts from the band during the apocalypse, and then they have a YouTube channel where we post the music. And the comments are great. It's, people are really into the fiction of it and kind of, oh yeah, I just saw them at this place. And anyway, it's been just a really good way to continue the lifespan of that game, even though that team has a really small, it's a very small team that's been continuing it over its lifespan. I think we've got 20 million players. And just recently, we had over 160,000 concurrent players. So that game's just, was released in, 2008? I mean, the original one. Anyway, so that's another way we've been doing it. Portal 2 soundtrack, we got a great response when that came out, did really well in the awards season, and people started, again, demanding the ability to listen to this music offline as MP3s. So we were caught off guard once again. We weren't really prepared for that. So we decided to release the MP3s for free via a blog, the Portal 2 blog, and ended up, I think, the downloads number in the several millions. And we thought that was pretty cool, but even still, people demanded to be able to buy it on iTunes, which is curious to me because you can get them for free. But I think people like the convenience of the thing they know, or they want to listen to it on Spotify. And still today, the easiest way to get on Spotify and iTunes is to get through an aggregator, like a distributor. So we decided to release a 4 CD box set, through Ipecac Records, which is Mike Patton's label. He's done some performances for us, and it was a really, and yeah, I mean, I love the label, but it also was a really quick conduit to Universal, which basically got us onto all the digital sites. One of the things, interesting aside, is we packaged some authorization codes, one of which was for a TF2 economy item, which was a mystery box when it first launched. I mean, when we first released the CD. We released the CD, it went top of the Amazon charts for a week, right? And then kind of tailed out, as you'd expect. When we cracked the box open, it was a Wheatley sapper. And Wheatley is, you know, this character from Portal 2, and Sapper is a game mechanic in TF2. When we cracked that open, the CD sales went right back to the top of the Amazon charts, right? Because the only way to get this item in TF2 was to buy the CD. It wasn't our intent. We weren't really gaming the system that way. It was sort of this interesting data point for us that we could do that and affect the sort of system that way. It's sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul. And I don't think intrinsically we believe in that sort of, you know, weird shift of money over to here to get it there. But it was interesting to see. And I think a lot of people really enjoyed it because they ended up with a CD in the process as well as their item, right? Which then they went in the game and sold for more money than they spent on the CDs. Anyway, going forward, so we'll continue to leverage all these different ways to communicate music with our audience. I think people like to listen to it on YouTube, go figure. I mean, I know I do, and I'm not really sure why, but I do. You know, blogs, all that kind of thing, as well as planting it in games. But I think we're realizing that we need to kind of make a space to be able to share music in an easier, more direct fashion, and for you as well, right? For everybody to be able to do this. I think we have over 100 game soundtracks on Steam, and I don't think they're super. I'm not even sure how you get to them, to be quite honest. And I should, right? All right, in-game music. This is kind of the stuff that I love the most. Real quick, you know, in film, sound and images go to support story. And I think in games, at least the kind of games that we tend to work on at Valve, story, music, images go to support gameplay, right? And so with that in mind, again, I can't say how much I think there's just the ways we can explore in that space are really wide open. Left 4 Dead was my first really deeply interactive game that I worked on. And when we were working on that game initially, Mike Booth, who I think is here somewhere, there he is, he was adamant, and I think we all were, that the game is an exciting, emotional game, and we really wanted to have music be part of adding to the the feel of the game and really getting the value of music in it. The concern is because it was a multiplayer, even though it was co-op, is that people were going to just turn the music off, which a lot of multiplayer, it's sort of their motto of, oh, I just turn the music off. It's sort of almost a macho thing to say sometimes. And I think sometimes it's a really valid point, right? You need to hear the footsteps, or, like the data, you need the data to be clear to be able to play the game to the best of your ability. So what we did is we experimented with having the music mean stuff, right? And have data in the music that you couldn't get any other way. And the way we kind of first discovered that, the first piece of music we put in the game, I think, was the tank theme, other than maybe the main menu or something. And when a tank would spawn, I mean, back then, too, the game was super hard. Like, if you even got to the point there was a tank, you were probably doing pretty well, and a tank would show up, and it meant the game might be over, right? And so we put music in when the tank spawned, and the tank could be in a distance, but you would hear this, right? Should say a rough mock-up of this. And it continues on and plays until the tank is dead. But then there was a bug, and this bug made it so the tank music didn't play anymore. And all these developers who, I think many of us are used to just turning the audio down, especially the music, were just like, holy shit, what happened to the tank music? Let's get the tank music back in there ASAP, because nobody could survive a tank attack. Nobody knew, that this tank was going to come. And so we took that idea, we, took that to heart and that data, and we're sort of like, all right, that actually really works. And so we started applying it to everything. The special infected are, kind of mini, not tanks, but they have all their own special attack values. And we definitely found, the game that people would get attacked by these things, and sometimes they have no idea where it came from. And then once it was done, no idea what happened. Why did they just die? What happened? And so we started applying music to these things. And so like the special infected, each of them has a motif that I'm going to play here that would play from their location in space in a kind of semi-randomly timed intervals that let you know that they're out there. And we also used other, vocal cues and stuff to really emphasize it. Okay, so that's just a rough smattering of them. They would never play like in that distinct order. It was kind of all timed to make a kind of an overall tapestry, if you will, of music, because there's ambient music playing in the background, and it was all constructed to be this sort of procedural environment of music that the gameplay is pretty hectic and quick. So you might hear, the horde thing here and a hunter over there, and then you get hit by a hunter and the music would go to that, or, your buddy would go down, and there were cues that would kind of inform, because it was another thing, like if one of your co-op survivors went down, you needed to be able to go help them, but you didn't necessarily know. And so, we'd play a little cue with them. So everything had meaning. The witch was a particular big problem. We put music on the witch. And it really worked. I think one of the things that we saw is that, if you go on the web, gamers are going to figure it out. They've figured out the entire musical puzzle. There are YouTube videos, sites describing exactly this cue plays at this point when they're this far away. Like, they've really taken the time to figure out. But we did see, even with people that afterwards would say, like, what music? I didn't know there were music. But they would hear the horde cue, and you could just watch them like back into a corner with their buddies, right? Because they would know that something was coming. And music does, we definitely saw, and I think we all know to a degree, when we say music is emotional, what we really mean is that it works on a pre-conscious level, that it communicates stuff to us, and the side of our brain that isn't linguistic, right? So, and some of us are better at bridging those two things, but we saw, and so we kind of came away from that game really knowing two things, like learning two things. One is that this is actually really valuable and interesting, and we also got to add musical entertainment value to the game through this technique. But also, we never could have done this technique if we weren't just experimenting with it, right? Like, and just trying it. Like, if you had sat down in a boardroom with the CEO or whatever and said, we want to do this crazy thing, like, it would have sounded just insane. But we just did it, and we took out the parts that didn't work and emphasized the parts that did. And I think that's just really super important for this kind of thing. Yeah, this title. I think this title is important. Even if you listen to MP3 these days, as far as I'm concerned, you're basically listening to software. But Portal 2 is a good example where we knew that we wanted to, because of the success of the trailer, again, people were really excited by the music in the trailer. We knew we wanted a lot of music in Portal 2. And we knew from the importance of the experimentation in Left 4 Dead 1 that we needed to be able to do a lot more experimenting. So we prototyped a new tool set, sort of a node-based system that is, allowed us, both of music and audio, but to really kind of push the bounds and try all kinds of new ideas. And so with that in mind, okay, so Portal 2, there's tons of music, and we're solving tons of problems, and I kind of can't go all, that would be a whole talk unto itself, probably a 4-hour one. But one of the things that we definitely identified along the way was that solving those puzzles can get pretty taxing and tiring, right? So as we experimented with the interactive music in the game, we found that one of the things that was really nice was when people could like take a minute either after or while they're solving a puzzle and go play with something, right? Explore the space and kind of play around. And one of the other things, Portal 1 and 2, as I don't know if you've played it, you'll know there's a certain degree of what's called multimodal perception, right? Like kind of virtual vertigo, this sort of thing where the information coming through your eyes makes your inner ear spin, and that sort of thing. And so we decided to kind of play with that because there's tons of it. You're doing flinging and going through holes and bouncing and all kinds of stuff. So this particular use of the interactivity really plays off of that concept a bit.
Just a heads up, that coffee we gave you earlier had...
So yeah, that sort of thing seemed to be pretty successful. Some of the other things that we were looking at is, immediately, like based on the Left 4 Dead 2 stuff and Left 4 Dead, we were sort of like, well, can we have some sort of information in the music that will help you solve the puzzles? Seems like an obvious progression from one to the next. What we kind of figured out, though, is there were too many puzzles of too many different types of solutions to kind of come up with a reasonably unified approach that would say, like, oh, this is what happens, and you learn this, and then. But the other thing is we realized we also didn't want to steal the aha moment from people, right? We didn't want them to suddenly go, oh, that music's telling me that I need to do this, and oh yeah, I solved the puzzle, cool, right? Like what we want them to do is go like, oh, right, I get it, I solved the puzzle without these clues. Right along kind of coincident to that is the writers really were emphasizing they wanted the music to represent the environment and not the main character, right? If you know Wheatley, he's kind of a goofy character, and if we were to put a hat on a hat, as they say in the film business, and play to his funny nature, he wouldn't be funny anymore, right? But instead, we played to kind of the dark, serious-ish nature of the environment, in some cases, the dangerous nature, and through that, we found that having the music be a part of the environment and coming from the machines, which fits the electronic music concept a bit, also solved this other problem, which is if the music's coming from these mechanisms as you solve a puzzle, typically these mechanisms get turned on and off, and usually they get more turned on as you solve the puzzle, you kind of get this positive reinforcement, this piece of music that you create as you solve the puzzle. So it's not really helping you to solve the puzzle, but it's definitely reinforcing the idea that you're solving the puzzle, as well as kind of give you a reward for doing so. This next clip is sort of these laser things that play. There's a bunch of them in the game, but for lack of a better way to put it, they kind of come together to form a minimalist piece of music, which is a composing technique from like the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I mean, it still exists, and there are still minimalist composers, but that's when it really hit. And in this particular example, I think this example I'm going to show, all the music's location-based, so it's very 3D. The combinations of them are almost infinitely variable. This particular one, you'd have to let it run for 75,000 years for it to repeat itself. So we found that kind of fun. So again, experimentation was crucial. I can't even tell you how many. I think there's like over 100 pieces of music in this game. In fact, the ending of the game is an opera of the little robots that kind of come together at the end and sing to you. The ones that have been trying to kill you are really sad that you're leaving, really, and they bid you adieu. So, you know, again, kind of following from Left 4 Dead. Going forward, you know, as far as I'm concerned, like the thing that interests me and I get really excited about is more possibilities in new games, and particularly in VR, right? Some of these multimodal concepts, I think, could be off the hook with VR. You could do some really neat stuff with spatialization as well as interactive play, and then the multimodal, like your motion and the music, how the music interacts with your actual motion in the space. And then, you know, we're continuing to develop our tools ever increasingly as we realize that it's really important, and it's a due time for that, which will help us to do these other explorations. All right, esports is something that we're paying a lot more attention to. I think we've always been interested, but we're certainly investing time and money in it. Dota has over 7 million unique players last month. And Counter-Strike had almost 3 million last month and just broke 100,000 concurrent players. So we're seeing that there's a lot of people playing games in a competitive space, as well as not sort of, but spectating. And I think it creates a lot of opportunities as well as challenges. Counter-Strike, we originally wanted to do a lot like Left 4 Dead, a lot of game state in the music, but after kind of analyzing it a bit and playing, we realized the Counter-Strike players were right, that you really don't want a lot of music in the game. You need to be able to hear the footsteps, right? So we kind of kept the music out of the way. What we did is, you know, every round starts, you get a piece of music while you buy your weapons, and then, you know, a little interactive piece of action music that then gets out of the way well within time.
I'm waiting here.
To not interfere with the gameplay, right? We did put a little bit of game state in. We put more at the beginning, and the community kind of said, no, we want a little less. So, but we still have bits like this that we feel like it does amplify the sense of the actual gameplay itself, as well as making some aspects of understanding what's happening easier. Like you hear that music, you're gonna know, okay, God, somebody planted the bomb. And you'll notice, though, that there it ducks pretty far out of the way. So if there were footsteps, which there will be, you can hear them, right? Then 10 seconds out from the end. It bumps back up, tells you, right, you've got 10 seconds. And also, if you're trying to defuse a bomb, that makes it a little stressful.
Terrorists win.
So one of the things, okay, so Counter-Strike, going into it, I was like, oh, boy, everybody turns the music off, quote unquote. But the data that we finally are tracking data for music a little bit shows that, in fact, 75% of all the casual players have their music on. And in fact, a good percentage of them have it turned up louder than the default setting, right? So that means people are actually in Counter-Strike listening to music. And if you look at the competitive rankings, there is a predictable inverse relationship to a player's ranking and whether they have the music on or not, and the volume at which it's set. And that's fine. I think that just gives us some data about like makes us think about how can we make, you know, music more valuable to the pro players. The thing you don't see here, though, is that half of the competitive players are at rank 9 and below, right? And 95% of them are at rank of 14 and below. So this looks like it really tails off, but, you know, the curve is more like, you know, like that. I think I was actually surprised to see how many competitive players actually, A, have the music on at all, and B, that it's as loud as it is. so going forward from there, one of the things that we're trying to do, and you know, the last thing we want to do is try and like force pro players to listen to music. That's just not in our interest. But the music is a valuable part of the game. We believe that. And if we can add that value for them, that'd be great. But one of the ways that we might be able to do it is make it so that their relationship with their fans and their spectating community enjoy watching them more, right? So we're looking at the spectating side of it and how we can kind of increase the entertainment value. And we're doing it in all kinds of different ways, but I think music is one of the ways that we'll be looking at in the future going forward. So a quick recap, you know, we're going to sell more tools and software on Steam so that our community can make music and so that we can, you know, have better ways to manage our software, because I won't go into music software. More ways to share music and media. That's a kind of a straightforward one, and that we're definitely looking at that. Our internal tools are getting much better, and we're not really talking about Source 2 here today, but that's sort of the thing going forward. Customization for serious players if they want it. More attention put on spectators in competitive games, continued exploration in general, right? Like that's probably the biggest thing that I, you know, just as a musician and as an interactive artist and a programmer, I find that just super exciting. VR is kind of a insanely interesting space from that standpoint. And then of course, we're interested in what you guys would like to see. So I think we have a few minutes for some questions. If you have any, go ahead.
Can you describe the procedural music system a little bit more? Was it like variable based? Were you arranging notes dynamically, or were you kind of just turning on tracks that were pre-written?
It really depends on which one you're talking about. In some cases, like the minimalist bit is our loops of varying lengths that kind of turn on and play from a location in space. The bouncing thing was sort of bits of pieces that are following a main track of structure and are kind of fading in and out as your velocity changes. There are other pieces in Portal 2 that are more sort of procedural, but not as much, right? The tools as we kind of prototyped and went along, it tended to be more track-oriented like that. Left 4 Dead 2, however, Left 4 Dead was, again, playing tracks, but they were not synced. It was a very kind of loosely assembled procedural juxtaposition of samples, if you will, of pieces of music. There were definitely some tracks that happened, like in combat. There's clearly some tracks there. I think there are some projects that we're working on now where we're breaking it down into almost having a sampler in the game, where, you know, we're actually then rewinding back to MIDI, right, and going back to some of the days of yore, right? So yeah, feel free, by the way, afterwards, just corner me and I'd be happy to talk more about these things. Did I see a hand?
Yeah, I was wondering the challenges that you faced with doing actually the dynamic music as a composer. We've tried to do some, and it's difficult to collaborate between the people implementing the dynamic music system and the composer without stepping on the toes of the composer's artistic vision when they have all these weird constraints. Weird.
We have the exact same problem. In my case, it's really not that difficult because I do both. And that is, it's a constraint / feature of our audio team, is that for the most part, all of our audio artists are also implementers. Every now and again, we'll have, like Mr. Fiza here, will do the implementation for somebody else who doesn't want to or isn't as knowledgeable about a certain aspect of our tool set. But in general, we tend to do our own implementation. And from my own standpoint, I almost couldn't, I could be an implementer, right? But I could never compose with, I mean, that's a pretty strong statement. That's not true. But I generally really prefer to do it all myself, because no matter how clearly I foresee what it is I think I want to do in the game. The second I put it in, almost 100% of the time, I have to change it. I kid you not, it's almost 100% of the time. Whereas like a video or something, a linear piece, you know, it's almost inverted. Like 99% of the time, I'm kind of right on when I write something and put it in. Yes?
What was your working relationship like with Kelly Bailey? And when he left, how did your role change?
You know, that's an interesting question. When I very first, well, let's see, how's the easiest way to go about that? Kelly was sort of the audio department when I arrived, right? There were a couple other guys doing audio, but there wasn't really a department. But Kelly is also a game designer and a programmer, and you know was filling a lot of shoes. And so when I showed up, he and I have a great intellectual relationship. Like we're good friends, and we love talking about like, you know, neuroscience and shit like that. And so when I showed up, he was just sort of like awesome, like somebody else, you know, like, and when, let's say Portal is a perfect example, he had scored Portal up to the point where we thought we were gonna release it, and then we decided, oh, you know, we've got a whole nother second half of the game to do. And he was busy with, I think, episode 2 or something, and he just came to me and said, hey, can you do the second half of this game? I don't have time, right? And so that worked out great. I think he was really happy about that. You know, when he left, I can't really go into why or what that was about, but he's back with us now, and I love working with Kelly. And he's truly, you know, an inspiration and a hero, really. You know, those Half-Life games just have some of the best sound and music ever. So I guess we're out of time for questions, but please, you know, I'm the guy with the Totoro t-shirt, so feel free to come say hi. All right, thank you.